guest, and this is No Law Firm Left Behind. Thanks for joining again today. We are here often and not enough. Lately, we've been kind of taking a little hiatus, but every Tuesday and talking about things that can benefit law firms from cybersecurity to technology. And today, specifically, compliance. Wow, that light just came on bright, didn't it? Sorry about that, Dave. Joined today by my good friend, longtime good friend, former business partner, turned back to lawyer, right? Dave Myers. Dave, how you doing?
Doing good. How about you?
Well, if I could get the sun out of my eyes, you know what I mean? I'd
All
be
those
fine.
blinds, man.
I'm good, thanks. So, well, everyone, listen. Today we're going to be talking about something that's very important to law firms. We're finding it's becoming more and more prevalent. Something that you're not going to avoid. Something that you're going to see on your cyber liability insurance policies and riders, right? And that's a lot of questions regarding compliance policies and such. So, Dave is an expert in data privacy and compliance, and actually has a practice built around this. Is that fair to say, Dave?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's my practice is focused on data privacy, cybersecurity, and technology law.
Yep. And so, who better to get on but a friend and somebody that I know is an expert at this, Dave? So, tell me why you think compliance policies um, are important right now. I mean, I kind of touched on it, but what do you see in? I mean, you're handling this every day now, right?
Yeah. So let's start by taking a step back and mentioning that our audience at No Law Firm Left Behind is obviously in the legal space to begin
Offer.
with. And so we, as an audience, they should appreciate the value of policy and procedure to start with. Not that we necessarily always enjoy it, but we intrinsically see the value in having policies and procedures behind the various business processes and business functions that we engage in every day. And we've had policy and procedure in many other areas for decades, long time. You know, the idea of having an employee handbook is just commonplace at this point. And what's the point of all this policy and procedure? Well, if we take something like an employee handbook, it's something that day one, a new hire gets, and it lays out here's the ground rules, here's the rules that we play by at this employer. And when we're talking about cybersecurity, these policies and procedures are really meant to do the same thing. And what's happening is the concept of cybersecurity and compliance is continuing to mature.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're seeing more and more is various stakeholders, whether it be an insurance company looking to underwrite a cyber liability policy, whether it be a client or potential client who wants to know that before they do business with you, that you have your house in order, or whether it be some particular legislative body or regulatory body or something like that that wants to ensure that if you're doing business in a certain area and you're holding certain kinds of data, think banking, think healthcare, things like that, that you're taking appropriate precautions to keep data safe. Okay.
Yeah.
And we're seeing more and more questions on the policy and procedure side of the house. Okay. So when we talk about security and compliance, it's typically explained as a three-tiered stool. And so we've got three different types of controls that we need to have in any good security program. You need to have your technical controls, your physical controls, and your administrative controls. Your technical controls are the things that most people immediately think of when they think of cybersecurity. They think of things like firewalls, antiviruses,
Right.
patches, all of those various doodads on the network, on the PC, on the servers, in the cloud, all that stuff that is built by technical gurus to try and keep us safe, to keep bad software from running, and so on and so forth.
Right.
We call those technical controls. Physical controls are just what the name implies, controls in the physical environment to keep information safe. This is something as simple as locks on doors, key cards, visitor,
Server cabinets,
logs,
server cabinets.
server cabinets, camera
Yeah.
systems, all these things that are designed to protect and increase the security of our physical environment.
Did you say key card
Administrative
systems?
controls. Say again?
Did you say key card systems? I don't.
Yeah, key card systems. So a key card system is a little bit unique because it has a little bit of both. It's designed to protect the physical environment, but there's always a technical aspect to it,
Yeah.
as well, based on the programming and whatnot. But it's a little bit beyond the scope of what we're talking here today. We can call it a physical control for the purposes of this discussion. Then we've got this nebulous administrative control. Okay, and the administrative controls have really begun to mature over the last several years, but they still have a long way to go. And so what I want to do today is really focus on what I'm seeing being asked and what attorneys need to be doing in order to get these administrative controls correct. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So when we say administrative controls, we're going to translate that into policy and procedure. Okay, we're going to simplify that. We're going to call it policy and procedure. And we're seeing more and more insurance carriers, clients, et cetera, saying, hey, we want to see these policies and procedures. Now, sometimes it might be one or two. Sometimes it could be a dozen. Sometimes they'll just say, show me all your policies and procedures regarding cybersecurity and data privacy. And so if we don't have a well-structured set of policies and procedures, we're not going to be able to show that. That's going to be a big problem. We're going to start throwing stuff together last minute. Trust me, I see it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And that ends up meaning that our policies and procedures don't always map properly to our reality.
Let me interject real quick a question. Okay, I know you're on a roll, but I want to get a question out, and it's a really good point. When you're asked by a vendor, by a customer or for an insurance thing, okay, and you haven't done anything in this arena at all, obviously you need it done yesterday, right? Because you want to win that client, or you know,
right,
whatever, right? Or get the insurance that you need. A lot of people don't realize that it's not an event, it's a process, right? And like any other process in law, takes time to create, develop, draft, so on and so forth. Let's just say we're talking about a small law firm under 40 users, something like that, right? What is a time frame that someone should realistically minimally expect? I mean, I know it could go depending on their systems, right? But what is this, give us something that, that process, how long that process could take,
Yeah. So the process is going to depend on how well, first of all, it's going to depend on the status of your IT. All right. And when I say the status, I mean you knowing, or whoever's responsible for your IT knowing, what you have in place. All right. That is typically the single biggest time constraint, getting these policies in place. There's really three stages in policy development. All right. First is we need to look at what our current state is. When I say our current state for cybersecurity, I mean with regards to our technical and physical controls. One of the biggest mistakes that I see people make is they, like you said, think it's an event.
Yeah.
And
I need
so
to
they get asked for a set of policies, and what do? They go out and they grab a
scrape them off the internet.
somebody else's policy, and it reads great. And they say, here it is. The problem is that policy, if it was actually ever even crafted right, was crafted for a particular environment. And it's intended to provide the guidance, the rule book is what I like to call it, based on what they actually have in place. If you pick up somebody else's policy and it says, our policy is to have X, Y, and Z, and you've only got X and you don't have Y and Z, you just implemented a policy that you don't even follow, which can be worse than not having anything at all.
Yeah.
So in order to get a good policy, the first step is to understand what you have.
Detrimental, actually, right, Dave?
Yeah, it actually is. And there are certain circumstances where having a policy that's inaccurate actually gives you higher exposure. A great example is privacy policies on websites. Okay. If you put up a policy that you don't follow, that actually exposes you in many instances to greater liability than if you didn't have a privacy policy in the first place. Because it can be considered unfair and deceptive trade practice.
Yeah.
And you can have the FTC come and, swat you. And so the first thing that you have to do is you have to understand where you're at. Only once you understand where you're at can you begin to craft a set of rules for your environment that say, hey, here's what we have, here's how we need to use it, and here's why.
Yeah.
Okay? That's typically the longest lead time in this process. Once, if I went into a client and they said, I've got X, Y, and Z controls, and they were able to give it to me day one, they could have draft policies that day. Okay? But oftentimes we will spend several weeks going back and forth sussing out the various controls that actually are in place so that we can make sure the policies are properly written.
So there's no such thing as rushing this. I mean, it's going to be.
You should not rush it. It's a bad idea to rush it. Okay.
Yeah. It's not like you can
information gathering is really the key thing here.
Yeah.
And making sure that we understand everything that's in place. And when I say everything, I mean, here's the data we hold.
Yeah.
Here's where we get it from. Here's how it goes in. Here's how it goes out. Here's who we share it with. Here's what we do with it when we hold it. Here's the controls we have in place to keep it safe. Here's the controls we have to keep it safe on the way in, on the way out, and when we're storing it locally. Okay? So you need to understand these things. And it's generally a failure in having any idea as to what we would have that causes us to have terrible policy and procedure in the first place.
Yeah.
Okay. But we're talking weeks at a minimum, usually, in what I see. So if you're planning on re-upping your cyber insurance or getting cyber liability insurance for the first time, if you don't already have it, you should start looking at this probably 2 to 3 months before you're even going to apply.
Yeah.
That gives us time to do two things. One, if we've got several weeks of just figuring out what we have, we may or may not find out that we're deficient in one or more areas. So you might need to put the technology controls and the physical controls in place. And that's not really the point of today's discussion, but it does add more time to that window where we need to start working on it ahead of time.
Yeah.
So, let's just say 3 months.
Yeah.
Unless you've got a good grasp on it. Once you've got a good grasp on things, if you've got an ongoing monitoring of these various controls, and that's really what I want to talk about, kind of phase 2, this becomes a lot easier and that lead time gets much shorter. I'm talking on the order of days to weeks instead of weeks to months.
So can we talk about the various policies? I know you've got something a doc you can share
Yeah,
here.
why don't you go
Can we
ahead
talk
and pull
about
up?
that and then talk about the various ones and the controls that are related to them? Maybe pop that
Yeah,
up.
why don't you go ahead and pull up this screen for me?
And I know if you're listening on a podcast, you're probably not seeing this, and that's okay. Just pop over to our YouTube or over to
Well,
LinkedIn.
and I don't know, are we able to do attachments to the podcast? Like, could we
I've
put
never
this
tried it, but
PDF?
I'll give it a shot, and we'll
Yeah,
see. We'll
okay.
see
If
after
not,
this.
we'll make sure,
I'll figure it.
Jim, at the end, maybe we'll figure it. We'll find some way to
Yeah, we'll,
get
we'll
this
make sure
out.
it's out there.
Okay. So what we're looking at here is a list of all the various policies and procedures that are included in a complete, what I consider a complete written information security program. I'm going to call it a WISP because it's a mouthful to say that over and over.
Yeah,
And so we call it a WISP, WISP.
that's where it
And
starts, right, Dave?
I'm sorry,
That's where it all starts is with the WISP, correct?
the WISP is really the overall program. Okay.
Mhm,
So when you have a written
mhm,
information security program, it's the idea that you have policy and procedure. You have the rule book that says, here's the controls that we need to have in place. Here's what they're intended to do. Here's how they're going to be used. And here's how we're going to gauge their success.
mhm, mhm.
That's the whole idea. And that's what we're seeing more and more of. We're seeing more and more people say, you have to have this written down. You have to have a written program. It's not enough to just wing it and say we have controls.
Right.
It's not enough to have it just in your IT guy's head.
And so each
And
one of the policies has elements of documentation from the evaluation phase. Yeah.
so different to different levels. Okay.
Mhm.
So let's take, I'm going to just cherry pick a few for the
Yeah.
purposes of the podcast.
Yeah.
Okay. What the people who are listening on podcast are not seeing is that there's a whole lot of policies that could be part of this.
Mhm,
And your insurance company might want to see 5 of them. And then another potential client wants to see a different 5. And so what happens is over time, you will ultimately have a big chunk of all these. You just might not need all of them right out of the gate. And what you're asking, Jim, is with regards to the documentation and the implementation and the evaluation of these various policies. So we're going to choose um, we're going to choose change management. We're going to choose data backup. We're going to choose patch management. Okay.
Okay.
And
Which are
each
popular
one of
ones, pretty popular ones.
they're very popular ones, and it's why I chose them. The other one, and I'm intentionally omitting it right now because it's a whole other podcast, would be incident response plan.
Mm.
Okay. That's one that's being asked for by virtually everybody, and it's a huge discussion unto itself. But for right now, we're going to talk about change management, data backup, patch management. And then I've got one more that I'll get to at the end, but we're going to kind of change gears a little bit before I talk about that one. When it comes to change management, the idea is you're going to have a policy that before a change gets made into your computing, on your computer systems, you need to have a certain set of checks and a certain set of, hey, we're going to make sure that it's not going to bring things to a screeching halt. We're going to make sure that it's not going to introduce a security vulnerability, et cetera, et cetera. And so your change management policy is going to say, here's our steps for any change to be put in place. Well, that's great. You need to make sure you have underlying documentation that before these changes are made, that these evaluations are actually engaged in,
Mm.
and that we're doing what the policy says we're doing. That way, if you're ever questioned as to, well, that's great, you have this change management policy, you're actually following it. Yes, here's the documentation. We have significant change. Here's the, evidence that we followed the process that's laid out in our policy itself. Data backup is another very common, it's something that everybody wants to know. Do you have good backups? Well, that's great. Do we have good backups? Well, Jim, you know this on, the joke we always talk about in the IT space, the backing up is the easy part.
Yep.
It's the restoring. That's the hard part.
And the hard
And
part is restoring it when you need it in an emergency.
exactly. And so for somebody to say, do you have a data backup policy? you can have words on paper. That's great. And those words on paper are probably going to say, we back up at least once a day. We replicate to an offsite location at least once a day. We keep things for at least 30 days. Okay. And I'm keeping this super simple for the listeners.
Yeah.
But let's just take that super simple scenario. We back up once a day, copy it offsite once a day, and we keep 30 days. That's what your words on paper say. How do you know that you're actually backing up once a day, replicating once a day, and keeping it for 30 days?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, you need to have documentation of that. Now, obviously, anyone that's working with a solid managed service provider is
Like SpliceNet.
Is going to be able to say, hey, I want to see my backup reports for the last, quarter.
Right.
And you'll be able to see, will they fail sometimes? Sure. It's technology. Sometimes it fails. But we'll see the failures, and then we'll see, probably there will be a ticket generated somewhere behind the scenes, and then you'll see the next time it'll run again.
Yep.
And that's your evidence that, hey, we say we're doing this.
So that's
the proof that we're doing it.
So correct me. And that is the administrative control, correct? The reviewing.
It's both ends of it. It's not enough just to say, we're doing these backups. That's not a real control. Like I said, that's just words on paper.
Right.
You need to have that back end where we're getting these reports that validate that we're doing what our policy procedure says that we're supposed to be doing.
Now, Dave, let me for the sake of time.
Yeah.
Which of these would a law firm's staff need to adhere to and be educated on themselves? They're not going to have to worry about data backup most of the time. That's going to be outsourced, or that's going to be IT staff. But generally, the staff in a law firm. Tell me about how we can make sure that they're following these things, and which one of them's, that's funny. Which one would they generally have to adhere to?
Acceptable use policy is a big one. The acceptable use policy is what lays out what your users can and cannot do with the technology that's being provided by the law firm. Okay. You can use it for work purposes. You cannot use it to browse Facebook. You cannot use it to download files from the internet. You cannot use it to send personal emails.
You should not send financial records in unencrypted email.
Exactly.
That kind of stuff.
Okay. So that's your acceptable use. That's key.
Okay.
Every firm needs to have that. And every employee needs to acknowledge it. And every firm needs to be keeping record that every employee has acknowledged it. And every firm needs to be tracking instances where they become aware of employees not following that acceptable use.
Acknowledge, track. It's a cycle, man. It's a cycle. Yes. Every time somebody leaves and somebody new is hired on, it has to be adhered to. It has to be
absolutely
mandated,
because that's the evidence. Otherwise, it's just words on paper. Bring your own device. In many firms, it's just understood that you're going to have your work, at a minimum, your work email, oftentimes document access from your mobile phone or tablet. We need to make sure that there are policies and procedures on what you can't do, that you understand what we can do as a firm if you lose your tablet or walk out on bad terms, as well as what kind of controls we might require you to have on that device before you can even access business data. Okay.
Yep.
Incident response plan, again, I don't want to get into too much detail on it, but the important thing to respond to your question is staff needs to know that if something seems weird, if something seems out of the ordinary, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Who do I contact? How do I contact them? What information do they need to know?
I clicked on something, nothing happened, and I ignored is not a good process.
Right. And so laying that out and making sure that your employees and staff understand their responsibilities to report things, and that a failure to follow these reporting requirements can lead to disciplinary action. So that's another big one. The couple other ones that are a little bit, your employees should know that they're there. they need to understand that there are sanctions for violations of this policy. It doesn't mean, oh, I did one thing wrong, I'm going to get fired. No, you can definitely structure your sanction system based on severity, frequency, et cetera, but your staff needs to understand that there are consequences if they don't do the things that are expected of them with regards to keeping the network and the environment safe.
Yeah. That
Um,
and that's important because without that, there's no teeth. And if
there's
there,
no teeth, and again, you can hope, you can cross your fingers that your employees are gonna do what they're supposed to do. But if there's no way to, you know, sanction when it doesn't happen,
mm,
then you're just hoping. You're
yeah,
not really controlling at that point. You don't
and
have an administrative control.
so part of the giveaway today is, part of the reason people would be here today is to figure out how can we ensure our staff have buy-in, right? Whether that's, voluntary buy-in or kind of involuntary buy-in. Let's talk about some of those things. We've been talking about a lot of these lately, actually.
Look, the reality is a cyber event at your firm is bad for the firm and can create significant financial, potentially firm ending,
Very
outcomes.
much.
Um, it's not about a big brother scenario.
No.
It's about trying to avoid an event that could cost you your job, not because you screwed up, but because something that you did caused such a bad incident that there's no job left to have.
Yeah.
Okay. Even if a business, and I mean, talk to anyone that's been through one of these cyber incidents on any, close, in any small business in particular. Even if the firm survives, the nightmare that these people go through in the
Yeah.
process is horrid. There's so much additional work, so much stress, so many nauseating moments in this process. And don't think that it's not going to affect every staff person, because it will. It's
Yeah.
going to create a terrible scenario for all your staff. So frankly, I would like to think avoidance of that situation would be enough to generate buy-in. I hate the idea that we would have to have a stick and sanctions to say, if you don't follow X, Y, and Z, we're going to fire you.
Yeah.
It's more, if you don't do X, Y, and Z, you could create a nightmare scenario for us all, including yourself.
Yeah. Very much
You
so.
know, um,
Lawyers could get disbarred over these types of accidents.
a failure to control, a failure to have oversight, a failure to have control of these processes is what's going to get you in trouble. Not the fact that something happened. It's if you are just bopping along without taking a continuous, having that constant pulse as to where we're at and how we can get better and continuously improve.
So
That
short of
failure that's going to get us in trouble.
so short of sitting down and reading them, the appropriate policies that are applicable to them, like Miranda rights or something like that, and having them say, answer. What kind of methods are you seeing for acknowledgement, right?
Yeah. So start with your base. Let's start with your most basic scenario. Let's make another parallel to the infamous employee handbook.
Yeah.
We all know the reality. Employee X starts day one, is given employee handbook, and somewhere towards the end of it, or maybe on a separate form, they're given saying, I have received, read, and understood all the terms that are in this employee handbook, and they sign it, right? And we know that maybe 10% of that of your staff has actually looked at the handbook, and none of them have read the entire thing, much less do they fully understand all of it. Okay, but they
Yeah.
sign the acknowledgement anyway, and we
Right.
just keep on rolling. Okay, that's your bare minimum.
Right.
Okay, I prefer, rather than throwing what some of these plans can get upwards of 100 pages, rather than throwing a 100-page document, and asking someone to just sign saying they've received it, read it, and understand it, because they won't. I prefer to pull out some of these key things. We talked about acceptable use. We talked about bring your own device. We talked about incident response. We talked about those things that we really want our employees to know and understand. And so we really want to encourage them to read and understand the policies that are behind it. And we get acknowledgement on those specific things. Now, we can always do that in addition to the overall policy, the overall program, but calling attention to those things in particular, I think is a good idea. Some people will go further, and I have seen where you might have small, very simple quizzes. Okay, so I've taught for years. And when I would give a reading assignment to students, I would not give them anything complicated. I would say, you're going to have a 3-question quiz so that I know you did the reading. And as long as you did the reading, they're no-brainer answers. They're stupid, easy answers. Okay? And I think something similar can be very valuable. And staff needs to take and pass that quiz. If they don't, then they have to take it again. And if after, there's a lot of different permutations you can go down that road.
Sure.
Then finally, it's about consistent training. You got to hammer these things home in lots of different forms and formats, in writing, in video, in audio, interactive training. You need to take these key concepts on the things that your staff needs to know and the benefits that they're complying with it bring. And you have to consistently reinforce that with them so that you can keep that knowledge, keep that understanding, and to keep that buy-in.
So we're up on hand here. Okay, we're a little over, which is fine. So is it safe to say that short of the technology aspect of it, this is what you're doing for organizations and law firms today, and their clients, even for that matter? Developing, the strategy, to be ready when you start to get those questionnaires, and so you have that WISP in place, and whatever is appropriate, right? The fundamentals, the training program for the employees, the documentation for the employees, and so on and so forth. Is that what you're spending most of your time doing these days?
Yeah, it's making sure that businesses, law firms, and otherwise are able to, in an agile manner, respond to this landscape that's changing so rapidly. It will never be done. You will never have a full program. You'll never have a complete program. We want to get you to a place where you've got a core set of controls in place, and you've got a management. You're able to manage them so that when something new comes along, it's a short skip to add that new piece in, instead of trying to do some complete overhaul where you're behind the 8 ball and you've got a client saying, where's this? Where's this? Where's this?
Right.
Okay. And that's really where I spend most of my time, is making sure that we're getting the most critical, highest priority things that most people are asking for. So that
you've got a program built around that
as it goes. Say again.
And you've got a program specifically built around that. We kind of looked at one of the papers on it.
Yep. I've got a full process that handles that ongoing management. Every single month, keeping up on the controls, the questionnaires, and just making sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing.
And I got to tell you, Dave, I've seen it. I've been involved in it. We've actually been on the technical side of implementing it at some customers of yours. And I got to tell you, I've not seen too many things that are as well-rounded as that, and not too difficult to move forward with. I think it's a very thorough package.
I appreciate that.
So I'll tell you what, Dave, we're going to close up here. I want to thank you again for hopping.
Thanks for having me.
I don't get you on anymore. Not enough. It's not enough that you're, it's got to be more often, Dave. You got so much knowledge.
I know. Just been, you got a lot of people to talk to. I'm just one of many. It's fine.
Oh, come on now. You're one of the few, actually. So listen, if you're looking for Dave Myers, Dave, we can find you on LinkedIn. I'm gonna make sure that you've got a link to your LinkedIn profile.
Great. Thank you.
In all the posts everywhere we can. But if you can't find Dave, just ask me. I'll hook you up. But Dave's readily available. Buckingham Doolittle, right?
Buckingham, Doolittle, and Burroughs.
Great firm out of Cleveland. Dave, can you work with customers outside of Ohio on this?
I work with people all over the place.
Excellent. Okay. Well, listen, thanks for being on the show today. You did a great job. I think it was great information. I think that all those controls of the, like you said, it's just a piece of paper. Watched Nike. I watched the Air movie, Nike, the other night, right? And I love the line in the movie. It's only a pair of shoes until somebody puts their feet in it, right? It's only a piece of paper until somebody acts on it.
It's true.
So, all right. Thanks a lot, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Listen, if you're not a member of No Law from Left Behind on LinkedIn, go find the group on LinkedIn called No Law from Left Behind. There's a page and a group. Follow the page, join the group. Also, if you're looking for our past shows and podcast, just hop on splice.net/No Law from Left Behind, or you can just Google No Law from Left Behind. Thanks a lot, everybody. See you next week.